As people are settling in, I'm just going to start. Very warm welcome from San Francisco. My name is Lucas Hagen. I'm the Creative Industries Program Manager here at Swissnex in San Francisco. And about a year ago, we launched a global dialogue on the Museum of the Future, together with one of Switzerland's leading design museums, Museum für Gestaltung, and partners from around the world. And we set out to discuss and reimagine what the museum could look like. And this conversation sparked new communities, new ideas, and also a new form of dialogue. And it left us wanting more. So that's why we built this new roundtable series. Today, we want to explore the intersection of sound, of community, and listening, and also ask the question, what role could a museum play at that intersection? We're organizing and co-hosting this conversation together with our colleagues in Swissnex in Boston and New York. We're joined here today by Mark Streit, and we're really excited to see how this dialogue unfolds. Before we dive in, I just want to say a few quick words about Swissnex. What is Swissnex? I'm quickly sharing my screen here. So, Swissnex is a global network where we connect the Swiss innovation ecosystem with hubs around the world. We had a dialogue last year with Swissnex in China all around sound memories and museums. And today we're excited to work with our colleagues in Boston and New York. We we think we can drive innovation at the intersection of research and academia, of startups and innovation, and creative industries and the arts. And that's why we're here today. We're joined by Joseph Becker, by Jason Reinier, and Francesca. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Joseph. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Swissnex. It's really a pleasure to be here and to talk through some of the great ideas around sound and how sound is this universal entity that affects us all. I'm really thrilled to be able to hear from Francesca and from Jason, talking about their work, their philosophies around the way that sound intersects with culture and the importance of making sure that we elevate ideas around sound, not just music, to be appreciated and create space for things like that. Just going to give you a little bit of background of why I'm participating in this panel, which is one of a three-part series that we are still working on developing. I am curator of architecture and design at SFMOMA, and I have recently curated an exhibition called Art of Noise, which was at SFMOMA in 2024 and is currently at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum in New York, which is actually where Jason is sitting right now. And this is an exhibition that looks at 100 years of design and music. It's really pointing us towards the visual artifacts that accompany many of our musical experiences. So in a way, it's slightly different from what Jason and Francesca work on, but it does let us tap into the way that music impacts us and connects us all together. We've spent some time in advance of this conversation kind of thinking around what it is that motivates the three of us. And this is about sound and memory. And I think each of Jason and Francesca will talk about their work in relation to that. But just by a way of kind of quick introduction on how sound and memory takes place in the exhibition Art of Noise, I'll share just a couple quick things before letting Jason and Francesca introduce themselves. So Art of Noise at SFMOMA was a chance to present hundreds of works, an exhibition that opened with a visual bombardment of graphic design and music, with a special focus on the psychedelic rock posters of San Francisco from the 1960s and 1970s, something that allowed us to really look at the intersection between graphic design and the emergence of a musical genre. Just quickly flipping through these because I want to highlight the way that audio actually played a big role in this exhibition, but these are shots from San Francisco presenting objects throughout the past 100 years with an interactive Experience designed by Teenage Engineering, our design partners on the exhibition design. And as part of bringing these objects to life, which of course, as they enter into the museum, they become static, we wanted to bring forward the way that they're used, and we created 8 videos that brought the objects to life. So here is a quick supercut of those sounds. And I think this is really the important place to bring Jason and Francesca into the conversation because it's really about the artifacts that surround us in general, the audio artifacts that surround us in general, where we become very aware of the memory making. And I think specifically right now about this kind of international dialogue that we're having. Jason, you're in New York, Francesca, you're in Zurich. And I was thinking about the sounds of ringtones, that the hertz and the pauses are very different within any country across the world. And we have these very personal relationships to them. You know, when I call a friend in the UK and I hear that pulse versus calling Italy and that pulse versus calling Japan and that pulse. And the same, I guess, could be true of the way that sirens sound and populate the urban environment in different cities. So anyway, we can circle back to that. But I'd like to have Francesca start and kind of introduce us to the OTO Sound Museum, and then Jason to do a little introduction of his work with Earprint.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for your introduction and your presentation. It was really interesting to listen to you. So welcome everyone. I'm Francesca Ceccherini and I'm the director of OTO Sound Museum, a nomadic museum founded in 2020 in Switzerland and more specifically in Zurich. We started as a team of people. Let me just quickly share my screen. Yeah. We started from the very beginning to think about what sound is. And of course, it passed through the strong reflection about listening, which is not new, of course, in sound. And we have like a very academic approach and literature about what listening is. But I think after the pandemic time, we needed to restore our relationship with imagination. And this passes through the fact that we were all the time in front of our computers and close at home, and the perception of our experience with culture, not just music or sound, but in general, what we went through was really a strong visual saturation, which brought some problems to what culture is. So I started to think, because I'm a curator and I'm an art historian as well, so I work with images for all of my life. And I started to ask myself, what is today the language that can really be helpful in getting in touch with such an imagination that we really do need? And I started to think about sound that I experiment with in several times, but never like for a longer time. So I founded a curatorial collective called Zaira Oram, which is the name of a woman. Zaira comes from a name of the Invisible City, the book by Italo Calvino, and Oram is maybe, you know, the last name that we got from Daphne Oram, which is the for me, the greatest experimentator of sound in the 60s, who created an amazing machine called Oramics, which is the one you can see now, to transform visual sign into sound. So experimenting in transforming this process of transformation, it was really inspiring for all of us founding OTO Sound Museum. But the big problem for us was like to be in front of this great saturation all the time. And we really wanted to avoid to create a museum that bring back this kind of experience. So with an expiration, as I said, to Italo Calvino, The Invisible City, but also looking at Bruno Munari, Fantasia, who in this book went through a passage calling the need, the urgency for invented museums. And I think today, in the 21st century, we are back to question what a museum is. So with the team, we started to think about sound, of course, but also to question what a museum is today or should be for people today, for communities. And we started to look at utopia as well, to the architecture. Maybe you can recognize this drawing. This architecture was never realized, but remain the Newton homage from the 18th century. And we were really interested into the circle shape. So that's why OTO Sound Museum, in its digital form, created like a circle where you can really enter into. With a very iconoclastic approach. So OTO Sound Museum basically started and was born as a digital platform, a platform with no images at all, just an iconoclastic platform, which asks you to play the sound, close your eyes, and listen to the sound piece. I wanted to bring this image because in these past days, the NASA disseminated this moon from behind, and was really touching for me because, like, the question for us was, what is beyond the darkness that we are going through? And this was a question of the 2020, but I think we can say it's a question that we can bring to the present time, in this wartime we are in. So we are in front of a darkness. What is behind the darkness? There is light. We really need to believe that there is light. And I think sound can be this light in a way. So what Sound Museum is presenting, disseminating, and producing, they are mostly artistic voices that have a strong political approach. We are really supporting artists from different parts of the world, from different generations, to bring to the attention of the audience their stories, their voices, their position, their political position. And we do it in two different ways, as I mentioned, in the digital sphere, but also in the physical space, mostly in the urban and the public space. So here, for example, is the digital exhibition that we have ongoing, this by the School of Mutants, All Eyes on the Eyes Heavier Than All the Gold in the World. And I invite you, all of you, it's a 26 minutes piece speaking about and taking position about the need to decolonize our practices, and also about the position of France in this case as really a colonial state, still a colonial state. I want to bring you another example. This is a piece, an exhibition that stay for 2 months. Every digital exhibition stay in our platform for 2 months. And this is by Pedro Reyes, a Mexican artist, called This Arm.
Back in 2007, I started working with weapons, with a project called Palas por Pistolas. I organized a campaign for voluntary donation of guns, and we collected 1,527 guns that were melted and made into 1,527 shovels to plant 1,527 trees. Then I was invited to Ciudad Juárez to do the same, but I wanted to do something different. So I collaborated with a group of musicians and blacksmiths to produce different kind of instruments. What you will hear next is the sound of a rifle that has been transformed into a flute.
So this is just to give you an example of what we present usually. We created for now 32 sound exhibition. As I said, every single exhibition stay for 2 months, and it's a single sound piece. We don't have many pieces, we don't have playlists, but it's just like to enter into a space and to have like just one sound. Then we go to the physical space. The one you can see now is the Kaserne Zeughauserareal, the former biggest military area in the city center of Zurich, where we invited like different artists to measure their practice with this space in different ways. What we like to call interventions. They are sonic intervention, usually performative or installation that we operate in the urban space or in institutional spaces. Here, for example, is from Francesca Ayo, who did a reenactment of a feminist group who was so strong in the 70s in Zurich to bring back, of course, with the symbol of a plate, which is like the homework for a woman, and to play with them, with musicians and sound engineering to create a big performance resonating into the architecture. Here you can see some moments. Here it's the community who was integrated in this space with a strong resonance in the arcos. Here we are in the Wasserturm, which is the water tower of the city, abandoned. It's in front of Old Botanical Garden. And here again, we work with the verbal visual work, Resist, Persist, Maintain by Stierman and Stojanovic, and different kind of intervention. Like, for example, here with the same group of artists, we did like a sound walk, listening to some quotes about people who worked in community and the capacity and the urgency to be back to be a community. So going around the tower, we learned together and we share knowledge through an experience. Here is another work by Axel Krettinan, Canotic Arrangement for 66 Voices. We did an intervention in the Sound Biennale in the former electronic powerhouse. Or here we did a sound meditation into the streets close around the Old Botanical Garden with the sound performance of Yannick Soland. Here we work, for example, in institutional space. We did that at La Rada. So we also measure our practice with white cube spaces, as you can see here. But usually we work with darkness. Here we are, for example, in another space for rehearsals and performance of Abdel Sak, who transform words from a colonial newspaper in Morocco into sound pieces and into a score. Here we are working with Polysonum at the Kunsthalle St. Gallen in 2021. Here the artist wanted to perform like a time stretch of a minuetto by Mozart, like pushing the capacity of big musicians as they are. This is like the symphonic orchestra of St. Gallen to play and keep notes for a very, very long time. And to close, maybe I just want to show you a short video of one of our intervention, because to see maybe it's easier. This is by Vacuum Group, The Whistle. Whoop, where is it now? Here.
We chose him, 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 we chose him.
So what you saw, it's the water tower, as I mentioned before, and the artist Gilles Aubry worked with 5 different performers to create like a vocal response of all the extraction, exploitation of the government of Switzerland in different countries, and more precisely in the countries where these women and performers lived or were born. So the idea was like to create an activation, not just to spread around knowledge. You know, the position of Switzerland is still like under. There is a big question about the implication of into colonialism about Switzerland. So it's important, and there are so many artists that are working in this direction. And this is just to thank you and to step forward into our conversation. But if you want to follow us, please go to Instagram, where you can follow us on OTO.museum or Zairorama, or if you want to follow up, you can also write directly from our website. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesca. It's incredible work that you're doing. And would love to dive into that in conversation, but want to hear first from Jason about what you've been doing with Earprint, and then we can loop back because I think that there's a lot to talk about. I know we don't have a ton of time in this session and want to make sure that we leave some time for Q&A, but let's hear from Jason. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Francesca. It's like a wonderful thing to know that a sound museum exists, calling itself a sound museum, because actually one of the things that I'm aware of through Swissnex was that there's sound museums in Beijing and there's a sound museum in Seoul, but these are all coming to fruition at a point when they're emerging at the same time. And so it's a very interesting, basically kind of recognizing how much sound is kind of becoming more important with exhibitions like The Art of Noise, with experiences like what Francesca's doing, and with a general sense of spaces that are using sound to share with community, these sort of combined community listening experiences. That seems to be something that's really on the upswing in our culture right now. And you can see these places really all over. But I'd like to sort of look at that as we move through these conversations, is where are these centers of activity? And to also say, Francesca, you have something you called nomadic, which is very interesting as a intervention. These exhibits come in, they become part of the space. But I'm really interested, I've become interested in my career to create a permanent sound museum. I don't really even know what it is, but it's been a vision of mine for a long time. And I'm using the word vision. It's really an ear vision because it's about sound. So I really want to say about myself, I'm Jason Reinier. I founded Earprint as a way to really develop my professional work. But I want to kind of go back to something much more simple, which is that I'm a sound person. And so what that means is being sound forward. Sound is forward in my perception. So as I'm sharing my life and my work, it's like I'm always engaged in the sense of sound as a primary sense, where visuals kind of take a backseat, which is different than most kinds of people. There's a lot of different. So I'm advocating for sound people, and I'm going to share some stuff. I'm going to try to keep it really quick, but I do want to share a bit of a listening experience. So hang on a second. Share sound. Okay, let's get rid of this. Okay, so this is a starting place, the sound wave. The thing that I want to talk about right now is shared listening, because as we get into this idea of space and kinds of spaces, I'm in a space right now. Upstairs is a beautiful listening room where people can just listen, and that's an exhibit. And it's really great that that's created with Joseph and the other creators in that. But group listening, when people get together and listen, is something I'm really interested in. So I kind of want to do a little experiment with you, which is to just listen. Like here we are in a group. I don't know how many are out there, but the idea of listening together is so important. And listening is something that we can do anytime. You don't need an exhibition. You don't need a reason, and you don't need a sound. And you need me to stop talking. So I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to count to 10 in my internally, but I want everyone just to drop your shoulders and just listen to whatever's around you. It might be your headphones. It might be something else going on, but it's just a moment to take stock and put sound first. So I'm going to stop talking and count to 10 and just see what's out there. Okay, we don't have a lot of time, but you could spend a lot of time listening and find all this wonder in sounds around you. And it's almost like a meditation. But that's just an action that I'd like to encourage. And I hope we can create spaces where we can do that. And I want to say a little bit about, I love the way that you started your talk, Francesca, with an ear, because it's like, yeah, ears are kind of beautiful in their own weird way. But this is my earprint. So the way that I came up with earprint was that I would listen to things both inside and outside. You know, I listen to things that are happening in the environment. As Joseph said, there's like qualities of space, there's qualities of locations. Environmental sound indicates a kind of a signature sound. But if you listen to the inside of things, you can also get a whole inner world, like the inside of a gas meter. You know, you walk down the road and you hear this coming from some object. And if you put your ear right up against it, you can listen. You go inside it. And that's what I do. And on one of my sound box, I actually pulled away and I saw a perfect impression of my ear on this surface. And it was kind of like a revelation. It was like, wow, you know, it's like a fingerprint and it's my ear. So that's something that I took into this account for earprint, and I've been using the word for quite a while now. But the other thing is, it's also a place for sound. It's a location of a sound. It's a place where a sound exists, and then it also has an environmental sound around it. So I like to think of it as it's more of a noun. It's a thing. It's a place. So anyway, I want to explore that further, but it's what we call point of view of the ear. And even when I say point of view, it's like viewing is visual. But what if we put the ear first? And it's point of view of our ear. It's a different way of thinking. So I'm advocating for that. And I really believe that we can continue that conversation and go with it. I just want to do a quick kind of review of what you said, Joseph, about place. Sound signatures is what I think of locations. You were saying how if you go to UK, you have a certain, I call it the beepscape. You get beeps, you get environmental sounds, you get different sounds of engines and cars. And, you know, when I first went to London, I was amazed at the difference. Taxis, buses, they all sound different than what I was used to. So this piece is something I really want to thank Swissnex, because I came into Swissnex with a friend who's a science storyteller, Monita Schlepfer. She did a piece that is called Climate Garden 2085. It was in 2017, and she put these two great greenhouses inside of the exhibition, each of which had different environmental conditions. And her piece was really a thought experiment about environment and how environments change with the conditions of the Paris Accord and not. But the framework for that, she asked me to contribute a soundscape. So I said, okay, it's an interesting idea. How would you match that? It wasn't clear exactly how to match it. I just said, I'm going to do a soundscape of the Bay Area and include sounds that both exist and are gone. As a way to kind of remind ourselves, you know, we live around sounds and we get familiar with them. And then all of a sudden they're gone, you know, or something happens, something changes. And that quality, it's actually a thing called sonostalgia when it comes to homesickness. And she used the word sonostalgia. And I'm not going to go deep into it because we're focusing on sound. So here's a sonostalgia. And this is a word that describes the same thing. It's kind of sonic longing, sound memory, the meaning of sounds, and how you might feel if a sound you liked you love wasn't there anymore. It's that loss. It's a mourning or grief, but it's also just it's kind of a delicious feeling. It's a passionate love of sound and wanting to preserve it, archive it. It's just, for me, this is a good word to use when we're describing that sensation. There's no other word that I can imagine. And this is an imaginary word that I want to use for this. But anyway, I have time for a couple of very short segments that demonstrate this. So let me show you a little bit. The first is the soundscape it was an 8-channel soundscape from Climate Garden, presented at Swissnex in 2017. And it's condensed to this file that's very dense. So you have to imagine spreading it out over the whole gallery. And then just listen, and I'm going to follow it up with something. But when you hear this, I want you to just think about San Francisco and what it sounds like. So that's basically a sound signature of the Bay Area, including foghorns, very distinctive sounds of San Francisco, and also species and natural characters. Species that kind of come in as birds. There's crickets. There's a lot of different animals because this is the climate piece. I wanted to show there's all these animals all over California. They all have a place in the soundscape, and you may not know them, but they're there. And it's up to the point was to just bring attention to the natural world, and to also include human sounds like foghorns. And then I want to play something because it's just an excerpt of the foghorns themselves. And this is an example of sonostalgia because the sound that we're going to hear is the sound of the Bay when Alcatraz still had a air-driven horn. And now, if you listen to the San Francisco Bay, you've got air-driven horns on the Golden Gate, that big boom, boom, really, and there's a diaphonic sound of a foghorn in there. And then there's this kind of wavering, it's very quiet in the background, but it's this beautiful wavering, almost a vibrato horn. So when you're listening to this, I just want you to think about it as this is a 30-year recording. I made it with a Nagra Eek, and I was lugging around this big thing with a mono microphone. It's not the greatest recording, but it's what I could do at the time. And it represents a moment that doesn't exist anymore. And I'm going to play it and then we'll move on. But I just wanted, this is an example of something that's not there anymore, that is actually a lovely sound, and I really miss it. Is it playing? Not playing. Okay, it's not playing for some reason. I really miss it now. Here we go. Okay, and as that fades out, just to note that the little high BP horns, the ones that are sort of in the higher range, are the ones that are replacing the air-driven horns. So as the soundscape changes in the Bay Area, it's moving to this electronic, high-pitched. It isn't very romantic. It doesn't, to me, I hate to say this, I'm being judgmental, but it doesn't have a lot of soul. Whereas that wavering, beautiful Alcatraz air-driven horn has this quality, it's almost vocal. It feels to me like it's a voice calling. And I really think that that's sonostalgia. I miss it. I wish it was there. and I tried to preserve it as well as I could. But again, it's kind of this concept that I wanted to get across. So I hope that that explains a little bit about my passion for this and gives us a framework for talking about the actions we can take to recognize really interesting local soundscape features and signature sounds for each area, as well as what we might want to preserve, how we preserve them, how we think about them, and what they mean to us. So I'll kind of leave it at that. I want to thank Swissnex for this great opportunity. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Jason. I love what you're saying about sound and memory, and sitting here in San Francisco, I didn't realize how much I missed that sound from Alcatraz. It feels very much like a kind of vibrato cry from the center of the bay. And we're surrounded by these noises that we maybe take for granted every day, and that impart themselves in our memories. And then there are sounds that show up every once in a while and trigger, deep memories. I think that we talked a little bit about the sound of telephone rings, but for me, hearing a blue jay at the beginning of springtime just triggers a kind of sense of place in a temporal landscape, or reminds me of childhoods and summertime and things like that. And I think we all carry around these sounds that maybe we don't think about deeply. So the work that you're doing and the work that Francesca's doing is very important to remind us of how we're impacted by sound. There's something that Francesca was talking about that I was really interested in kind of hearing more about, which is this idea of sound as an impetus to activism and art. So it's not just about our personal relationships, but the importance of sound for greater good, or for progress, or for resistance, or those kinds of ideas. And I'm trying to figure out how we hold these two things together in this, like 10 more minutes of a conversation before we open it up, thinking about sound as a purpose for a larger social cause, and sound as a deep, introspective, personal feeling, memory, connection point. If either of you have a thought on that.
Francesca, you're muted.
Thank you for this question, Joseph. I think, the relationship between sound and memory, between sound and resistance is not new. We know that people from the fields, when they were forced to work in the fields, for example, for slavery, during that time in different parts of the world. And this is very interesting because also anthropologically speaking, all the people reacted with their voices, with their body, to resist, to stay in the present time, to do not die. And I think sound has this power to keep us alive. And this is not new. It is not the present time. This is something that we get from the past, and we are still using that. People are going into the squares, for example, to resist, to share their ideas still. We see that in music as well. We have many musicians that use their text, their lyrics to share their ideas. But I think there is something new, which is the relationship between sound and trauma today. Because I think the visual sphere is over in that way. I mean, it's not over because there are still images that are able to say the truth, to resist, to react to our time. So I'm not against the visual world, not at all. But I think that the artists more and more are finding in the sound sphere a place to experiment and to react, a space where they can politically address their issues, a place where they can meet and create community or a sense of belonging. And that's why I think that listening in that sense can be at least a radical form of repair that trauma. So even if we are not in war, as we are, for example, now we are lacking, we are not under bombs. But I think listening to each other or try to spread this capacity and education for listening is very important, because listening is able to bring the conflict to the end. No, what do you think, Jason, about this? What do you think about listening?
I think I mean I agree with you entirely, and I also think that sound itself as a phenomena, as a vibrational experience, can be healing. So there's a whole movement of sound healing that's actually different, and people flocking into these kind of experiences where they're using sound to as almost a bath, bathing in sound. And I see both of these things as emerging. They're really rising into people's consciousness, and it's an awareness of a thing that is a vehicle for healing and repair in the form you're talking about, and also for physical. We need a respite. We're really in a loud, very chaotic world, and I'm really an advocate for like a place where you can sit down and comfortably listen, and you're encouraged to take it to be in the present with sound, and be it an effort to engage politically and motivate. It's a motivating force, and people also use it to soothe, like the singing in Minneapolis. That was when it brought tears to my eyes, when people were gathering in these huge groups and singing to protest. It's like you were saying in the field. It's a healing energy, and it's shared.
Mm-hmm.
But about communication, I want to say one very important thing. I was going to say it earlier is I'm a professional listener. That's what I've done my entire life, but I still don't know how to listen. I'm still like needing practice. It's a practice. It's not a given. We're not born knowing how to listen. We have to practice that communicating, and as a community, listening to different voices and really taking in, like, not always preparing your case before you respond, but actually leaving space for somebody to respond. And it's an action that we need to learn from.
Yeah.
So it's kind of all over the place, but those are the ideas that I hope we can explore as we're looking to creating space for listening. Like, what are the characteristics of space that feel comfortable and safe, and therefore people let go and they're able to be fully present. And however we engage them, activism or preservation or comfort or joy, whatever we want to be able to create those spaces for people to have those experiences. That's
this intersection between the auditory space and the environment that you actually experience it in is really interesting, and it's something that we've spent some time on for Art of Noise. But I love, Francesca, what you were saying about music and singing, and same with you, Jason, about this being a very kind of human need to express sound in sequence, sound kind of layered with shape or mathematics or whatever it is that creates what we consider music. I think that there are studies that suggest that early humans made music before they figured out how to actually communicate with language. And so giving us an opportunity to kind of tap into that and almost surrender to that on occasion is really refreshing and really important. One of the things that we've attempted to do with the listening room that's upstairs that Jason's going to kind of take us into in a few minutes is to create a space for the collective to tune directly into the experience of listening, an attempt to get us to the point of deep listening, which I think is part of the ambition of OTO Sound Museum. It's the ambition of Earprint, and it's the ambition of the listening rooms. So it's also interesting to me that there is this resurgence in a kind of wellness space around listening, about nurturing our bodies and our souls and our psyches through being able to perhaps compartmentalize the steady stream of things that are coming at us at all times, information, images, and just to be able to kind of narrow that down to absorb in smaller packets. Which I think it's a really beautiful thing to be able to do.
And more
Yeah.
people are needing it and able to access it, which then is cumulative. It's kind of like, oh yeah, experience it, and the word gets out, and people are flocking into these spaces. They're I want to make kind of maybe a framework comment about this, because what we have is a number of smaller venues creating those kinds of spaces. And we can define them as sound spaces, multiple kinds. But as those small spaces grow, and as festivals that are or nomadic experiences become more desired in a sense, there's a need for a permanent place, so that there's I can go to this place and explore all these myriad ways of enjoying, getting comfort from, being challenged by, being activated by, all the things that we were talking about. What would a space look like where you could go have those experiences and not have to buy this? You get one ticket and you go in, you can explore them all, as opposed to a ticket to a show or something that just happens by. So I'm really interested in that intersection. What would that be like, and how would we facilitate that? Because I think people need it. It's like, it's obvious that people want to have these sound immersive experiences. So how can we use this forum to talk about it? And how could we kind of think about innovation in this sphere? Because it's kind of bubbling out everywhere. And I'd love to hear from everybody. I want to stop talking because I want to hear from everybody who's doing it and learn, which is another form of listening. Like, stop talking and you listen more. Anyway.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why also we give so much attention to the curatorial part. I mean, when we develop some project or intervention, both in museums or like in the urban spaces, we try to understand what is the best condition for the display to work in order to listen, and to listen together most of the time, not always, but most of the time. And I think this aspect that we also experiment as a curatorial group of co-listening, which is not new. I mean, it's an idea that we brought from Buddhaditya Chattopadhyaya, which is like a researcher, also a sound artist from India, who wrote about the co-listening and the idea that we need to listen to each other, as I mentioned before, but more is like under a decolonial perspective, because sound, as the arts, can be still a colonial space, or where colonial power is imposed. That's why also, for example, the sound studies were Western for many years, for decades. And also for us as curators, it's so important to bring to attention this kind of discourse and to understand, not just to give space to like the global South perspective or the global sound languages, but how can we learn to listen to each other, to coexist? And this is the power of co-listening for me under this decolonial perspective, which is like that follow many other kind of listening we know, like, for example, the deep listening for Paulina Olivieros, which is still very important. I mean, I didn't want to mention this also because you are in the US, but it's still like a milestone for the listening research. But today we are talking about third listening or co-listening. So I think the co-listening can be also an answer to our geopolitical problems at this moment, and how we can also teach and express a different kind of listening education.
Mm.
Yeah,
Wow. I
amazing.
love co-listening is a very I want to put an asterisk on that, because I think that actually addresses what the issues of space is. What are co-listening spaces versus individual listening spaces? Because we all know that we put on our earpods to create a sense of closure around, or a bubble, maybe even a sense of protection, an identity of me listening, as opposed to what is it like to take the earbuds out and to co-listen and to cultivate that. Just one more comment, and I think, if we have questions, right, we want to go to that. But the only thing I really want to resonate with you on that is the idea of looking at culture, looking at local cultures being celebrated, because every place on the planet has a sound of itself. It has a tradition. It has a culture. It has politics. It has meaning, and that can be celebrated, as well as a global awareness of it. And that the global awareness makes it possible to communicate the differences, and yet celebrate them at the same time. So it's like, I think that's a really important dialogue between the local and the global. And I think that we could, with the virtual world, we can go global, but still back in the permanent place is where you can do a local.
There's an amazing web app, I think, phone app too, called Radio, which allows you to circumnavigate the globe and move across time to find sounds, music, so you can hear what would have been either playing on the radio or culturally relevant in some corner of the world from 50 years ago. Any questions in the chat? So I'm not sure if we have
there's
anything coming through yet.
Q&A option here, and we have a first couple of questions. Do you see the Q&A at the bottom?
Q&A at the bottom. Q&A, yes, there it is. Okay, great. First question from an anonymous attendee is that the other day I was in the bus listening to all the bips, jingles, and announcements, wondering, do cities have sound designers for all these sounds? And in general, do we think a lot about how those daily sounds and how they shape the impact of our mood and overall feeling and experience of a city? It's an amazing question. Do either of you have a sense of that?
I'd like to say that signing is, just to identify that signing means translation into other forms of communication. Because, one of the things that I believe in is universal design as a premise for everything. When you're creating something these days, it's like universal design does create an accessibility for everyone. So thinking through an announcement, like, oh, it's an audio announcement. What's the equivalent if you can't hear? Or a visual announcement, what's the equivalent if you can't see? And those kind of, that's a laboratory of opportunity, because so many things aren't yet at the level where universal design is fully implemented. And it really could be something of a huge change to have equal penetration in, using haptics, using braille, using other means of communicating, sound being one of them, but without ears. And I'm talking about this with actually creating a storytelling exhibit, because how do you handle people who are quote unquote, hard of hearing? And it's not a spectrum, it's a spectrum. Some people can't hear anything. Some people hear a little bit. Some people hear low frequencies. And it's just really interesting to try to figure out how to handle any of these differences. And I think we can bring that. I think that should be a whole, literally a whole panel talking about that, because there's so many ways of bridging it.
Yeah. So a little bit of the question also was, is there somebody that can essentially be a creative director, though, on the sound of a city? And I don't think that, given the cumbersome nature of any kind of bureaucracy, I don't know that there's any single entity that could think of the whole sonic landscape in terms of infrastructural noises. But I love that that's a beautiful provocation. Um, and it's interesting to, to think about that little short clip of all the haptic sounds that I played from Art of Noise, the amount of time that's spent on the sound of the click wheel from the iPod, for example. All of these things that we somehow take for granted, but do add up to a very dense sonic landscape that we move through every day is really interesting.
Yeah, I also want to stress that because since I think 40, 50 years, I think we are under attack with sound because ear is still a place of attack for our brain. And there was, I think, Oliver Sacks who wrote about earworms, and these sounds who are able to enter into our brain and to make us behave in a specific way. And I think about, for example, commodification. If you go in a specific shop and the people want you buy something, they push you to buy something because also of the music marketing and all the music consumption. So I think we are controlled to quote also Gilles Deleuze, who think about and speak about the society of control. We are the society of control, and of course, sound can be under control. That's for sure. So I think this person got the point, and
Yeah.
that's why we need to train our ears. We need to train our way of listening to protect ourselves for the brainworms.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Amazing. Amazing. I think we can all kind of recall somewhere deep in our memory some kind of jingle from some kind of advertisement from our
Yeah.
childhood. And it's in there forever. Um,
Yeah.
so we're at our time, and I want to just kind of transition us now. We didn't have a lot of time for Q&A, but we've dedicated the next 20, 30 minutes to this kind of shared listening opportunity. So Jason's going to pop upstairs, and while he does that, I'm going to just quickly introduce the room that he's about to go into. So yes, we are in a bit of an experiment here. This kind of wraps up the panel portion. And so we wanted to give the opportunity for people to stick around and have a kind of moment to dedicate themselves to listening. And I also want to thank Francesca so much for being part of this panel and for introducing the work of the OTO Sound Museum and your perspective on sound, which we could talk and talk and talk about this.
Take the occasion to thank you, Joseph, for your interesting question and for your introduction, and also Swissnex, San Francisco, and New York for everything. Really, it was really nice this meeting, and I'm very much looking forward to meet you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesca. And for everybody still on the call, I just want to remind you we've got 2 more sound panels dedicated to these topics.